When Joe Walsh checked himself into rehab in 1994, he later admitted he didn't know if he'd survive the year. In a 2012 interview with ABC News, he said there were stretches in the 80s where he couldn't remember entire tour. "I was a mess," he confessed. "I was lucky to be alive." This is the same guy who once sang, almost proudly, "I can't complain, but sometimes I still do." The same guitarist who turned hotel rooms into demolition sites and wrote "Life's Been Good" as a wink at his own chaos. What happened between the hard-partying Eagle, who joked about losing his mansion in Malibu, and the sober, reflective musician we see today is one of the most dramatic transformations in classic rock. Joe Walsh wasn't just another sideman. By the time he joined the Eagles in 1975, he'd already redefined guitar hero status with the James Gang and his solo work. Funk 49 had made him a household name. Rocky Mountain Way became a staple of 70s FM radio. He had toned for days, thick, overdriven slide on a Gibson Les Paul, talk box experiments that would later influence players like Peter Frampton and even modern rock acts. But Walsh also came up in a music industry that practically rewarded excess. The mid-70s Los Angeles scene, Sunset Boulevard, record plant sessions, private jets between stadium gigs, wasn't built for moderation. As longtime Eagles fans know, by the time Hotel California was recorded at Criteria Studios in Miami and the record plant in Los Angeles, tensions inside the band were already simmering. Add Walsh's unpredictable energy to Don Felder's precise musicianship and Glenn Frey's iron grip on direction, and you had brilliance and friction. If you're a longtime Eagles fan like many of you watching, you know how rare it is to get the full story behind the headlines. And if you're new here and love these untold stories from rock history, consider subscribing. We've got plenty more where this came from. Joe Walsh's early life didn't scream rock god. Born in 1947 and raised in Ohio, he studied English at Kent State University. He was there during the turbulent Vietnam era, and according to Walsh, the cultural chaos of the late 60s shaped him as much as any guitar influence. Before he was writing arena anthems, he was obsessed with the British invasion, the Yardbirds, Cream, The Who, Pete Townshend's windmill strums, Eric Clapton's Sustain, those were his textbooks. The James Gang formed in Cleveland in the late 60s and exploded with Funk 49 in 1970. Walsh's riff-driven playing and slightly off-kilter humor made him stand out. But by 1971, he reportedly felt boxed in creatively and left the band. His solo career took off with Barnstorm and 1973's The Smoker You Drink, The Player You Get. Rocky Mountain Way, with its talk box solo, wasn't just a hit, it was a statement. Joe Walsh wasn't just a guitarist, he was a character. Then came 1975. The Eagles had just lost Bernie Leadon and were looking to harden their country rock image. Glenn Frey had known Walsh since the early 70s and once described him as the missing link between the Byrds and the Rolling Stones. According to multiple band accounts, Walsh walked into rehearsals and immediately changed the chemistry. His gritty tone and improvisational style pushed Don Felder to elevate his already meticulous playing. The result, Hotel California. The dual guitar harmonies between Felder and Walsh on the title track became legendary, not in a vague way, but in the technical interplay of minor key melodies, phased effects, and perfectly structured solos. Walsh's contribution wasn't just notes, it was attitude. He helped move the Eagles from country rock into full-blown arena dominance. But that was only half the story. What happened off stage would become just as defining. By the late 70s, the Eagles were one of the biggest bands in the world. The Hotel California tour grossed millions, stadiums, private jets, endless encores. But according to Don Henley, the band was burning the candle at both ends, and Joe Walsh, he was pouring gasoline on it. Walsh has openly admitted that cocaine and alcohol were constant companions during this era. In various interviews, including one with Guitar World, he described the period as all blur. There are stories, some confirmed, some exaggerated, of hotel room destruction, lost guitars, forgotten interviews. In 1978, Walsh released But Seriously, Folks, featuring Life's Been Good. The lyrics were satire, but they cut close to reality. I have a mansion, forget the price AI, never been there, they tell me it's nice. Fans laughed, critics praised the self-awareness, but behind the humor, there was a man spiraling. The tension inside the Eagles reached a boiling point during the long run sessions in 1979 at Criteria Studios. Glenn Frey and Don Felder famously nearly came to blows backstage in Long Beach. The band fractured. By 1980, after a benefit show in Long Beach, the Eagles effectively imploded. Henley later described it as the worst band breakup since the Beatles. Walsh, suddenly without the Eagles machine behind him, drifted further. The 80s were not kind. Solo albums came and went. MTV favored new wave and synth pop, and Walsh has said he was drinking from morning to night. According to him, there were moments when he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. But that wasn't the worst of it. In 1980, years earlier, Walsh had suffered a personal tragedy when his 3-year-old daughter, Emma, was killed in a car accident. Friends have suggested that this loss haunted him for decades. Walsh rarely spoke about it publicly, but in later interviews he acknowledged that grief played a role in his substance abuse. It's a reminder that behind the headlines of excess, there was real pain. Before we move into what changed everything, quick thing. If this kind of deep dive into rock history is what you enjoy, a like really helps us keep bringing these stories to life. Now, back to Joe. By the early 90s, Joe Walsh was at a crossroads. The Eagles had reunited briefly for the Hell Freezes Over project in 1994, a name borrowed from Glenn Frey's old quote that the band would get back together when hell freezes over. The MTV special and subsequent tour were massive successes, but Walsh has admitted that at the start of that reunion, he was barely holding it together. According to Walsh, he checked into rehab in 1994 and has been sober since. In interviews with Rolling Stone and other outlets, he's described sobriety as learning to live without anesthesia. "I had to learn how to be a human being," he once said. For someone who had spent nearly 2 decades in a chemically altered haze, that was monumental. The difference showed on stage. Die-hard fans who saw the Hell Freezes Over tour often point out that Walsh's playing was sharper, more intentional. The extended solo in Hotel California wasn't just muscle memory, it was controlled fire. His tone remained thick and expressive, but there was clarity behind it. Offstage, Walsh became an advocate for veterans, inspired in part by his late father, who died in a plane crash while serving in the Air Force. In the 2010s, Walsh launched VetsAid, an annual concert benefiting veterans' charities. It wasn't a publicity stunt, it was personal. He also reconnected with his sense of humor, but this time without self-destruction attached. Whether it was guest appearances, solo tour, or interviews where he poked fun at his past, there was a sense of perspective. The chaos that once defined him became part of his story, not his identity. And yet, even now, some fans wonder, does sobriety dull the edge of a rock star, or does it finally let the music breathe? Final reveal, then V's now. So what's the real transformation? In the 70s, Joe Walsh embodied the excess of rock stardom. Multi-platinum albums, private jets, a lifestyle so wild he turned it into a hit single. According to those around him, he was brilliant but unpredictable, hilarious but unraveling. The then version of Joe Walsh was fueled by adrenaline and addiction, teetering on the edge. The now version is something different and arguably rarer. A sober musician with over 3 decades of recovery, a founding member of one of the highest-grossing tours in history, a man who channels his platform into philanthropy rather than chaos. He still plays the same biting slide guitar. He still grins during the Life-'s Been Good intro, but there's intention behind it. In a 2016 interview, Walsh said, "I'm supposed to be here." Coming from someone who once admitted he didn't think he'd make it past 50, that hits differently. The transformation isn't about losing the edge, it's about surviving it. If you made it this far, you're clearly as fascinated by Joe Walsh's journey as we are. Subscribe if you want more untold stories from rock's greatest legends. Joe Walsh's story isn't just about fame or excess. It's about resilience in an industry that chews people up. The riffs are still there, the humor is still there, but now there's something else: clarity. And maybe that's the most rebellious thing a 70s rock star could ever achieve.